gravity.
Okay, and the person I just heard from, would you like to introduce yourself and your favorite tree? Yeah, that's you, Kiki.
Oh, now I got a name. Okay, just wanted to make sure I wasn't the person. Um, so yes, I would
Mine-
say for today, I will go with a dogwood tree.
Good. Steve, you want to put your answer in the chat if you are not able to connect audio? All right, I have 16%, and I have to be able to call a car by the end of this. So we'll try to get as much out as we can, or I might find an outlet if someone charges my phone out here.
60 or
So
16?
16. 60, we'd be fine. 16, I think we can do a half hour to an hour. But all right, so I'm still down here in Austin, and some things have been made abundantly clear to me. The system is broken, but it's working. Now, we got to take perspective. It's working in the sense that developers, banks, and people that are able to manage assets in a particular way are winning. There's a lot of building, there's a lot of money going around. There are people that bought houses for $150,000 that will sell them for $700,000. But the other side of it is things are cannibalizing themselves down here. So that there are neighborhoods where the old house that was like $150,000 has fallen into total decrepitude and leaning, and the roof is falling off, but it's still selling for $500,000. So the person who sells it, like, oh, cool, I've made effectively $350,000. Well, A, if they still owe to the bank, they don't get all that. But let's say they don't, they get all the money. Can you buy something in a neighborhood with the money you have? Possibly. But if you have a house that you bought for $100,000 to $150,000 and you're on fixed income and don't have a job anymore, you're 70 years old or what have you, then your credit or like your income won't actually allow you to buy a $700,000 or $400,000 house, even though you have, $200,000 up front or what have you. And so people get jammed into where can they move once they sell. Black people are getting moved out of Austin. Like the public housing is being redeveloped, and people are being moved to the outskirts where there's very limited public transportation to allow them to come back and forth into the city. Very few services. When you're looking at the setup of Austin itself, like I've been learning more and more about the segregational policies in Austin and what was done by the city of Austin as well as the county of, I think it's Travis County, and like paperwork on like black people cannot live west of the highway. And the highway basically has always been here, like from the beginning of the city. And so there are documents where it's like free black people are not allowed to live inside the city limits west of here. And now that the city is starting to transform, the first neighborhoods where people are being pushed out are the black neighborhoods. And apparently that's happening in San Antonio, black and brown neighborhoods. That's happening in Dallas. That's happening in Houston. And there's literally almost like a format for how the highway has been used to separate community and now used for redevelopment closer to city center in these larger Texas metropolitan areas. Um, I posted some stuff online of like how much houses are going for. Like a tiny, not tiny house, like technically not like 400 square feet, but like a 1,200 square foot house, $900,000. Not 3 floor, not a huge footprint, on a whole acre or something. No, no, quarter to a half acre lot, $800,000, $900,000. Now, theoretically, you buy that now, you can sell it for $1 million too in another couple years if there's no housing bubble. But the question in Austin is, will tech be able to keep growing, and are you going to continue to have the influx of people who work at Google, Tesla, Apple, all these other companies where they can pay outrageous rents or buy exorbitantly priced homes? Does this make sense, everybody? Mm. So, any questions or any thoughts just from that quick breakdown?
Sorry, Tito and everybody else. I just got kicked out. I don't know what happened there, but I'm back.
Okay.
I just I don't understand how like I don't understand how most people could ever even be approved to buy a house right now. Is it just all have to be like in groups of things and
So I think this is why Black land ownership is going to be of more and more importance moving forward in figuring out ways for people to uh, collaborate and find like-minded individuals to probably purchase in concert or in collaboration with. It is very difficult economically for an individual to purchase a house now. And so couples that are above, I think, 45 are now the average kind of first time home buyer instead of a single man with a job or a married couple at a certain age. Uh, Single women now own more homes than single men, and married couples above, I think, 40 now are is the average for a first time home buyer. So, so I thought I was on the phone. Didn't mean to have it so close to my face. I'm like my mom sometimes. But so the question is, if you don't want to purchase with a romantic partner, what are the ways in which you can do it? You know, and with a property or a home being an asset that can be classified by the SEC in certain conditions, how do you make sure if you go into syndication or you have investors or you have partners that are limited partners or if you have general partners, what do all these words mean? What are the different models that people have co-owned properties? Do you want to use a LLC? Do you want to use a B Corp? Do you want to be an S Corp? Do you want to be a not-for-profit corporation? Do you want to be a decentralized autonomous organization? What are the ways in which you would then collaboratively own this asset? Um, and one thing that I didn't see is what's the migration plan? So like let's say you have a whole neighborhood of in this case black folks in East Austin that can each sell their homes for $700,000. They've lived there for 30, 40, 50 years and they won't be able to move somewhere else in the neighborhood. Well, if 10 of them take the money they get from their houses, that's 10 times $600,000. They can go somewhere and invest and develop another town, basically, or an entire neighborhood. If you go into certain neighborhoods where the houses are still $200,000 and you have 4 million, 5 million in capital, you know, what are you able to do? And I haven't seen that plan of like cooperative migration, which is something to be considered, I think. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Uh, but it's the next part is I'm trying to figure out how to project the areas that would be gentrified, right? So in Asheville, there was a black community, but not a large. So when Asheville really modernized, it was a group of developers basically that bought a whole bunch of hotels downtown and then started influencing the government to push tourism in Asheville. Then obviously the tourists will patronize the hotels. Those people in the hotels that visit the city will then go shopping and go out to shows and whatever else, and that's tax revenue. That's you know, uh, tourism as an industry. But then those same developers started building apartment complexes or started buying up neighborhoods and were heavily involved in the gentrification in Asheville, where they weren't necessarily moving out a bunch of black people because there wasn't a large community, but obviously the one that was there was heavily affected. But it happens in a lot of these kind of smaller towns that are just below like kind of industrial boom or just like below a certain population number. And so how do you predict or project that to the towns where there are black folks and get black people to invest in those areas before we are gentrified out, right? So if people had known what was going to happen in Austin back when I visited in 2008, and it was like, oh, the East Side is, has a certain stigma, and I could have projected and looked at the math and been like, Google's going to come down here, Apple's going to come down here, or whatever company will be here. Yo, all y'all Atlanta folks where it's getting too expensive in Atlanta in like 2004, in 2007, 2008, 2010. Houston's getting too expensive. Austin. But we didn't do that. And the black community is being pushed out here. So I'm starting to think like how to notice the trend of which cities are prime for that type of gentrification and cut it off at the pass, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And also to add to that though, I guess coming from the true curmudgeon over here, say, I do believe that I think one of the problems and one of the reasons for Black land ownership is that there are a bunch of people who know that that's happening way before it's happening because they're planning for it. And the unfortunate part is that that involves developers, government, and big business owners who own a lot of property and are starting to buy up, realizing what their move is going to be. And so you need to have people on the inside constantly looking out for community, and that's not always the case. Most of the time, not the case.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so the question is like, by the time developers are in the game, are we too late to compete in any way because of how much money they come in and with upfront cash? Now, if you already have a migratory plan set up, so like let's say there's a migratory plan of Austin to somewhere else. Is there another city that has the potential of being gentrified similar to Austin that people would be willing to develop if they leave Austin or if they leave Miami or if they leave DC or if they leave some of these other places where now your family may have been there 60 years and you're like, yo, my family got this house for $80,000. It's worth 900,000. I'm out. Where would
And
people go? Go ahead, Gravity.
okay, my thoughts with all of this, you're saying we also have to like, I don't want to move to like a state that is not like big on women's rights. And
Well, I'm not suggesting we move to
I
Texas.
feel like even like Texas, what were you saying?
I'm not suggesting we move to Texas. I'm just saying a plan for where people are going to go instead of being forced out, but a migratory plan.
Yeah. And well, I guess we just plan to go somewhere that has most of what we need for everybody. I don't
No,
know.
but
Now,
I
I mean,
understand what I
sorry, go ahead.
understand what you're saying in regards to it, like it doesn't have to be the people in this room, but it needs to be that because like yeah, there's a lot of people in New York that aren't going to move to Texas just because they think there's a real estate investment or there might be some, and that also could cause problems. But being able to know what's happening prior to when it happens or thinking about that gives people the opportunity to make decisions, whether they're in those areas or in proximity to those areas or coming from a distance to support whatever community movement is happening there. But being able to have those opportunities makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something I didn't really think about as something we should or could do. But I think, and this is me being ridiculous, but that's okay. Uh, this is the time for frontier behavior. Like, there's so much upheaval in the world. This is not when you root in for me. Like it feels like this is a really good opportunity to do what you couldn't have done 5, 6 years ago. And with the economic destabilization, with the ability for people to work away from an office for now, who knows if that's going to continue? What opportunities are there? And before technology changes, um, it feels like part of Black land ownership is going to be telling people like, yo, if you're not happy in the city, be out. And I can't say that if I don't at least try to help develop a plan for how to be out. And more than just here's how you buy a property, but actual like here are places to go, or here are ways to do it, or here are examples of people who've already done it. And to have to say this out loud to put it on the whiteboard metaphorically. Um and I don't feel right being in cities that much. Like when I walk around and I'm like peeping stuff, like we know more about a football team than where our food comes from. Like that just actually doesn't make sense. And like I know it's like, yo, it's modernity. Don't worry about it. Your fingerprint gets taken to go to your job. That's odd to me. Like we went to the grocery store and we were checking out the bananas, the machine didn't work right. So the cashier has to come over and help. And in order to get the machine working again, she has to scan her finger. And every time she interacts with the machine, she identifies herself using her fingerprint. And that's normal for people. To go to work, I have to scan myself. That's not normal. I'm actually becoming one of these people that's like, yo, I work in tech. I work around motherfuckers with AI. It is not conspiracy what's happening. And I'm interested in where can we go where there aren't fucking cameras everywhere with surveillance and stuff. Like, and that's becoming real to me. And I don't do shit. So it's not even like it's just on principle of like I and this is rude. This is rude, but I want to be places where you don't have to put fake stuff in your face in order to feel normal. Where you don't have to like fucking commodify everything you do in every second of your life in order to have value. Um, and part of that then means probably not trying to jam myself into these circular pegs that are cities in the way that I have. You know, but I still enjoy cities. I've enjoyed being in Austin. I enjoyed the people, the history, the people that have told me the history of the place. Um, and I like the architecture. There are tons of things I like about the city, but more and more, it's just like, what's going to be happening in 20 years? Like when you look at how much has changed in the past 20 years, what's the direction we going? And I'd like the option of, cool, if the city's awesome, let's spend time there. If it's not, we don't have to, if that makes sense.
Hmm. I think having that option is really important and something for people to think about for sure. That there needs to be. I think there's awareness around it, but I think the idea that there isn't much awareness around how, or there doesn't seem to be much belief that if you are somebody who's making, let's say, under six figures, that you would ever have, and you don't come from a family that can support you, or don't have a trust fund, or whatever the things are that help people to do this, um, that actually there are ways in which you can build options for yourself when it comes to how you live and where you live, and that there are abilities to create choices, but it does take working with community. And I don't think that is something that is really, I think we see things like that in little ways for promotional material, but the reality of it isn't really promoted, discussed, or really a lot of people don't think that that's possible. And I've now learned through a lot of the work that we do that actually it is possible.
So I'm gonna put some things in the chat. I definitely think what you're saying is true, Melissa. And the I'm gonna post in this chat some building statistics
Somewhat.
and stop building statistics. Stop doing that, computer. Sorry. All right. So have a look in the chat. Hopefully this will work. So the first thing is look at this house. 4 bedroom, 4 bath, 2,000 square feet, $800,000. One floor. Okay. Estimated $5,128 a month for mortgage. That's banana cake. All right. The next one, 1,200,000. 4 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,220 square feet. Okay. 7,726 a month. All right. What kind of fucking mortgage is that? 7,000 a month to be in a 1,200 square foot house? Okay. And then let's see the other one in here.
That's most city living.
Um, then the construction costs, foundation, wall system, roof, kitchen, bath, windows, door, finishes, average around the country, $400,000 in order to build the house, right? Just the building portion. The last photo is the home building process, where it totals at about 650,000 and takes about 290 days to take a house from start to finish. Uh, Land 110K, design and architecture 5K, structural engineering and whatever 5K, permitting 20K, project management 90K, construction 400K, sales 20K. Now, where is it? The average like home being bought or sold is going for 400 something thousand around the country. So this is saying new home build. What group of people are able to start with a $600,000 project, right? And so this is like what developers are using as a model for housing, and then what quote unquote affordable housing is. And so part of what we can think about is where can costs be cut in this schematic by
Yeah.
utilizing resources within community
Well,
and
construction
start,
is one big part and project management.
and how do you build in educational pipelines for these capacities, right? So instead of just saying kids learn to be coders or computers are the future or real estate's important, everyone be a real estate agent, how do we actively say, all right, the areas of construction where there are needs and where what is it like kind of like skill sets have a use across a variety of platforms, bam, and start thinking about what are the arenas where we just won't be able to lower costs initially, and that it's going to be a longer range plan for that. And do you need a $85,000 kitchen and bath setup? You know, do you need $25,000 in finishes?
No, and I mean that all depends on what your purpose is. So I think, unfortunately, well, number one, a lot of people build off of not being able to, not in a bad way, like this isn't a negative about them, but like not being able, like not having the imagination or knowing the possibilities. They're able to see what other people do and then they mimic it, or they work with a project manager or construction group, contractors, and they show them models that they can build off of, and that's a cycle that keeps repeating itself. If there are other models out there, there are ways to create the same exact types of kind of, or not same exact, but the like a very similar type of luxuries. Let's say you want to have a bathtub, and that could be really expensive, or you want a jacuzzi or a big, something or other. There are ways to work around that in order to make those things happen, but unfortunately, we kind of work, I feel like in this country and in a lot of states, also with regulations, it's built off of let's just mimic this model and keep it moving through all the people instead of how do we reinvent, reimagine, recreate, use community to build. Those are questions that aren't typically really even allowed.
Yeah, I mean there are, I guess, ways of approaching it, right? Like, let me look at this. Certain things are going to be dictated by not just procedure, but by permitting or like building code. So when you look at MEP, and that's the going to be your like electrical and plumbing and all the other like kind of wirings and those systems. Those are normally regulated by a municipality, and you have to hire certified professionals. And there are going to be fewer quote unquote like corners you can cut in that arena. But again, it starts turning into are there are we are the current systems efficient? Are the current systems actually what we need? Are people being sold more than what's actually useful or even aesthetically pleasing? If we are more educated as home buyers, are we able to influence some of the costs or have an understanding of how to mitigate some of these costs, if that makes sense?
I think those are all really good questions and should be in a spreadsheet for different people to look at. Yes.
And so the next thing, let me see how much longer I have. I have 7%. All right. I started making a chart of how Americans are classified in terms of wealth, right? And so in the past, we had low class, middle class, upper class. middle class seem to be if you make like $30,000 to $80,000, like $50,000 to $100,000, and upper class seem to be above $120,000. Now, according to most recent reports, in certain cities, middle class means you have to make $120,000 to $130,000, up to $150,000. In other places, as low as like 80 to 90 for middle class. Upper class, that means you have to be over 120, over 150. When you break it down, though, it's kind of broken into people that make less than 30,000, people that make 30,000 to 50, people that make 50 to 75, 75 to 100, and then 100 to 150, then above 150. Um, the two extremes of people that make over 150 and people that make under 30 are somewhat comparable. There are more that are in between the under 50 than over 150. And then there are a number of people in that middle ground. When you look at the average cost of housing, as well as how much money you need to make in order to get a loan or to get financing, there's a mismatch in what groups of people will be able to afford average cost of living. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so something to consider is like, how do we discuss that misalignment where the average income person can't afford the average cost of a house?
I mean,
Right? You would expect that unless we're moving towards a renter based society. And what does
well,
that mean?
we're also moving, I think we're already in that place that you're talking about. We're not moving towards it. The average person cannot. But the problem is that we don't even, because we are in a space of debt is what we do. So whether you can afford it or not, you find a way to do it is kind of what the situation has become in the United States. And you then live the rest of your life paying off that one thing. And that's what a lot of people have been doing here. And so I think we have hit the spot where the majority of folks are not able to afford to own their own home. And when I say afford, I mean they can't pay for it in a without having a huge amount of debt over their head. Like that's just how our economy works.
Oh, well, that's a totally different not that it's an unimportant conversation, but totally different one in the sense of what happens when everything is rooted in the idea that you're not expected to be able to pay for it, and that people can price gouge knowing that you'll either go into debt or that there's a subsidy and another entity will cover their profit margin. And that's just a huge issue with corporate capitalism right now in general. Um, but let's say you decide you're okay with going into major debt. Are you able to even get a loan the size necessary to get an adequate property or asset? Like
The
if
majority
you
of
and
people
your
cannot. No. Yeah. Right.
right, and so I think then another question starts becoming in talking to people or in having a way of delineating who's interested in what we're doing is who's okay with everyone being renters. And the people that are like, yo, I don't really care, I don't see that as being potentially problematic for us as community, are probably going to be folks that later will be able to talk to about it. But I'm like the general, I think, premise that like of accepting, I think, imbalance is not something I'm like trying to navigate. I think I want to be able to be more clear about like activity and us like being not like again like activists or like telling people what to do, but finding the people that are deeper in it than we are,
Hmm.
and that can help share best practices and kind of really start looking at it in a more holistic thing of of how have people migrated, how have people set up communities, what have been some of the success histories.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that's where a lot of research has to go into that at this point. We are, and yeah, I mean, The hard part is there are so many people that can't even begin to envision, and I'm not saying this again against them. It's just so many people that cannot begin to even envision what the other possibilities are. And so, yes, you can find the people that are doing that work and who are looking to do that, but we also need to educate the people coming up about the possibilities that can exist if communities work together. And I think there is a lot about that movement happening right now, but it's only happening in certain sectors.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's something to for me and for different people involved. I think as interesting types of research to do in
Hmm.
thinking what kind of communities and whether again it's going to be communes or whether it's going to be how people have done timeshares or how people have done group ownership like social clubs. Like there are all these different ways that people have figured out how to kind of engage with land, space, and each other. That isn't based on like kind of always being there or all the same people always doing all the same thing. Uh, so there are some options.
It's also an interesting situation in the face of kind of this a lot of people kind of wanting their own space, but also not being able to afford their own space. I think that's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I mean, and the isolation. I think I know we like being by ourselves, and we think it's very important that we can survive without others. And we're rugged individualists in America, but I don't think it's working out well for people. I think like people, it's I, there's something about humans needing other humans that I do still believe in.
I
And
believe in
so, but but having the choice of like,
Yes.
you know, not being crammed on top of each other in inhospitable, stressful like environments, I think is also important.
I,
So go ahead.
oh, sorry. I was just saying that I think a really unfortunate part about what's happened, but fortunate to know about it because it helps make change, is that there is that work became a space in the United States for where community was developed. And so I think a lot of people like school and work became communities that were developed outside instead of it being like, other things that might cause a different kind of unification. And so people started getting sick of that type of community, a community where we're going into a space we didn't actually all commit to or create. And this is where we're building our connections. And so then they were like, you know what? This isn't that fun. I'll stick with my family. I'll stick with my couple close friends, or I'll stick with myself. And
Yeah.
then, and now we're in that space where we're seeing people reject that, especially since the work scheme has completely changed throughout the pandemic. And we're trying to figure out what a reunification could look like when it comes to community. And I don't know what that is in the United States right now. I mean, I have ideas, but I don't know what it's going to look like for the masses or how people are going to reignite that spark. Or if it's going to take, very big low points like how sometimes when there's like a Great Depression or unfortunately like a war or things like that, people come back together. But I don't know what it's going to look like for us, for this country, I mean, if that makes
That
sense.
it does, and it also makes me think about in a way, even though the job site wasn't necessarily where everyone wanted to be, it put them in a pool of engagement with people to then choose from and develop close friendships with coworkers or engage in activities outside of work that stem from relationships that grew out of work. And with that fracturing and people not being forced to be around each other to then decide who they want to be around, it's a much different kind of social engagement experience. And I think I do find it really odd that when we're out in like upstate, people are so distant by actual proximity. Like you have to drive everywhere. Um, Not many people walk around. Like you kind of have to. You're in your own little box as you travel through the area. Uh, but when you do meet, like, see people, you're talking, have like deeper conversations. but there's just far fewer people, more space in between. I get into Brooklyn, and the same people in the building like don't actually hang out with each other. Like even though there's 8 other people within 500 feet of each other, we never have dinner together. We never go anywhere together. We don't watch TV together. We don't even share cinnamon or you have salt or any of it. And it's so odd how comfortable we've gotten being isolated, whether it's due to geographic proximity or just choice, or like kind of having no attachment to the people that we are living in proximity to. But I don't know if there's something to quote unquote fix with that, but it
Mhm.
doesn't seem like that matches the majority of human history. Like that seems off. And I'm trying to figure out how or in what way, but it just yeah.
I agree. I mean,
I
I think
agree
that
too.
what we saying, Gravity?
Just that I agree too.
Yeah, I'm interested in watching how that shifts. And I think, you know, in this sense, and it's funny, it always brings me back to Artery and Vladik and some in that organization, but in that sense, other countries, many of them, have very different connections to community, I think. And not that anybody's better than the other, but it would be interesting to see a research study or like what sparks community across the globe and like which countries seem to be more connected to community within the workplace, which countries seem to be more connected to communities when it comes to like just proximity or neighborhood, what countries are developing, is it just more family connection, or what are the things that spark community in other spaces? I would be curious about that.
So in I think in a number of different sociological or anthropological studies, they basically said that there are going to be certain activities or events that, despite the type of culture, will achieve the same goals throughout the cultures if they're similar enough. And so one of them is going to be like an activity that allows members of society to gather,
Sure.
meet new people, see people that they already know, work out differences away from where those differences originate, um, have opportunities for romantic contact, this, and that. So in certain places, that was the bowling league. In other places, that was the cotillion and cotillion system, or like quinceañera, where you present the youth to the community as an adult. But you would have either all these ceremonies. And for us, what started becoming the forced reaction or a forced interaction, and then what is the recreational activity, and then what is family activity. And as those things change in terms of family members not staying close to home in different times, as people don't keep the same job for 30, 40, or 50 years, but only for 2 or 3 years at a time, as technology advances, as people don't marry as frequently and also divorce with more frequency, what what then becomes the places or what become the activities for the social bonds that would have been the church or would have been the water cooler or would have been the bowling league or small team or
Hmm.
and so like how do people view community building in these different spaces? Like or like you said, different countries. Like are there places where church is still that mechanism? Are there places where people didn't end up working from home or never were in offices, so they weren't affected the same way by the pandemic?
No, it's interesting for sure. And I guess that is also an interesting correlation of what, how is architecture, I mean, we know with architecture at least, but, or I've been learning a little bit about this, but how is architecture, how is kind of kinship, how is, um, I just lost my thought here, but how are these other things affected based on how community evolves? So, so if you have, if communities are evolving through, a religious gathering space, and that's the center of the community. what do, is some religions might be more modest. And so the way that architecture is developed, the way that family structure or meeting spaces are developed, and what significance has that played in the United States in terms of how we evolve when it comes to the spaces we're buying, the spaces we're creating, as our communities change drastically as well. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about because I don't really hear a lot of people talking about that. Um, I know that we talk about that in history, but talking about it in future, like now that there's such a shift in work, in religion, and spirituality, in sort of political beliefs or how much people are invested within community politics, what is happening to space, and how we develop and how we invest. It's an interesting idea.
It is because, and I think it's interesting how this ties back into the land aspect and purposeful use and the different elements that we could uh, direct towards, or kind of in thinking about, are there uses of land, property, or space that have been beneficial to marginalized communities that are being either erased or dissolving slowly as the rest of society moves in whatever direction it is moving in, that could be useful for us to retain? And what would some of those things be? I'm in a cab. Can you write that down, Melissa?
Sorry, Chris, what did you say to write down? You just
The
said a lot.
idea of like
I
what you were saying in terms of like how space has been used for purposeful gathering in the past that was beneficial to marginalized groups, and how some of those spaces are being dissolved or are kind of erasing as the rest of society moves in whatever direction it's moving in, but to where they could still be of use to us. And so, how to then have more understanding of purpose or direction when talking to people about space use, um, architecture, and what we choose to do with land that we have access to.
The last part is what I'm missing here. I have how space has been used for purposeful gathering and how some of those spaces are better dissolved or are being dissolved and erased while the rest of the society is evolving. What is the purpose moving forward when it comes to
Wait, so let me try to say that differently. It's not evolving, it's just moving. Like it's society is doing its thing. There were activities that took place in purposeful spaces that were of benefit to marginalized communities, right? Like whether it's kind of community centers in the Bronx where hip hop starts out now, or whether it's the rec center, or whether it's an after school program in a old library or something. So then, as the libraries disappear, or as the community centers disappear, or as um, the meetings that we used to have in particular marginalized communities disappear, as those communities develop, how can we be more purposeful as Black land ownership when talking to people about figuring out what some of those spaces were, how land use occurred that was a benefit that it are now dissolving, or like now kind of facing erasure, um, that we want to retain. Does that make sense?
I just put it in the chat.
Cool.
The chat saves with it, right?
Please,
Okay, I'll put it somewhere else too.
I'm gonna copy.
What?
So I'm gonna copy it also and notes. Because I mean, for the most part, when we talk to folks about land, they usually we usually end up going one of three or four directions, like a residential space, commercial space, a farm, or conservation. But what are going to be some of these other uses that have had importance to us? Uh, So,
Mm-hmm. I like it. I just sent it into the doc too.
all right, I'm in the cab, so I'm gonna get off the phone in a second. But are there any like last questions? Or any last things that I wanted to say?
Thank you.
I just wanted to say I think a lot of good and interesting stuff came up today in terms of ways to continue thinking and be purposeful about, you know, the different aspects of what we might want to be engaging with in terms of Black land ownership. So we actually got like 3 or 4 really good kind of new waves. Not that they're new, but just things to really think about and reflect on.
Well, thank you all for a good conversation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Have fun crocheting, Gravity. Say goodbye to
Look,
the hat, the temple.
look at this thing.
Oh wow. Wow, that's beautiful.
I'm very colorful. Get me.
All right.
All right. Well, see y'all soon.
Bye bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye.